He- Hello, Rich. All right. I am Stephen Henderson. I'm a journalist here in Detroit who wears many, many hats around town. I'm the host of Detroit Today on WDET. I'm the founding editor of Bridge Detroit, and importantly, I am the host of American Black Journal at Detroit Public Television. I want to welcome everyone who is not from here to Detroit. It is really great to see you here. You're also here at a great time when the weather is cooperating in Detroit. If you'd come just a month later, it might have been very different. I want to welcome all of you to kick off the Solutions Journalism Collaborative Summit. In a minute, we are going to hear from Solutions Journalism's co-founder, David Bornstein. Also, remember that during this whole exercise, you can participate online at Twitter. You can hashtag collaborative Sojo. Did I get that right? See, I did. Hashtag, that's right. Hashtag collaborative Sojo. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m., we're going to hear from Amy Goyer, who is an author, a speaker, and AARP's consultant on family and caregiving. Both her talk and David Bornstein's talk are going to be carried live by PBS Books. This two-day conference, which starts today, is being hosted by the New York and Michigan Solutions Journalism Collaborative, the Southwest Michigan Journalism Collaborative, and Detroit Public Television. It brings together journalists and community members to discuss and learn more about the principles of solutions journalism and how we all make our work matter so much more. And who better to begin this than someone like David Bornstein? He has been a journalist who focuses primarily on social innovation for more than 30 years. He began his career at New York Newsday, then shifted to international reporting for a number of publications. From 2010 to 2021, he co-authored the Fixes column in the New York Times, which examines efforts to solve social and environmental problems. David is the author of How to Change the World, Social Entrepreneurs and the Power of New Ideas, and two other books. It is my pleasure to introduce David Bornstein to you.
Thank you, Stephen. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Rich Homburg and Detroit Public Television and the New York and Michigan Solutions Journalism Collaborative and the Southwest Michigan Journalism Collaborative for hosting this and coming together to join forces. And I want to acknowledge my wonderful colleagues in the room, Karen Magnuson, Amy Maestas, and Liza Gross, for their great leadership. I'm really excited to be here because I think the work that we're discussing and celebrating today is one of the most creative and important innovations in journalism happening pretty much anywhere around the world. And I'm especially excited to be in Detroit, which is the most important city in America. I understand. So, but a city that we really truly need to understand the future, especially of urban America. I also have a personal connection to the issue of caregiving. My mother passed away 11 years ago today, and she had Alzheimer's for many years, and my father cared for her, and it took a real toll on him. And it actually was, I grew up in Montreal, and I used to call my dad late at night. I live in New York around 11 or 11:30 just to check in on him, and he would go to sleep watching the news. And one night I called him, and he said, I said, "Hey, Dad, how you feeling?" And he said, "Dave, I'm convinced that human beings are worse than animals." And I said, "Are you watching CNN, Dad?" And he was. But I got off the phone and I felt angry that, on top of having all the things that we have to deal with in life, people have to be really, harmed by news that actually continually feeds them images of the world that makes them anxious and believing and sort of losing faith in humanity. So that was really kind of the SJN origin story. And as everyone in the room and many people watching know well, journalism has really been facing a kind of polycrisis, many different crises at once. It's an economic crisis, a kind of existential crisis. Does really good journalism matter? A crisis of trust, having to deal with disinformation, attacks on reporters, and audience disengagement. And at the same time, we're at this moment where it's this sort of all hands on deck time for the country and for the world. We face, daunting challenges around climate change, democracy, economic inequality, racial injustice, mental health, and caregiving, as we'll talk about today, and just really reweaving the very fabric of American society and societies in India and Brazil and so many other places. So the question for journalism really, I think, is, how are we going to meet the moment? People desperately need to be informed and activated by information. If we're going to meet our challenges, we both need to understand what we're facing and also what we can do about it. What are our best available options? And this is an issue that affects, all nations everywhere. Journalists are working harder than ever. They're working faster than ever, and we are not getting very much love for our work, and that's a true thing. At the same time, we have fewer resources to help the public make sense of a world that's more complex, interdependent, and uncertain than ever. At the same time, a growing number of Americans, according to the Reuters Institute, it's now 42%, say that they actively avoid the news. They feel overwhelmed by it. They say that there's too much information coming at them that creates anxiety, outrage, and fear. When I speak to some of my friends who work in television news, one of them said recently that our business model is to monetize outrage and fear, which, and people say the news makes them feel disheartened and powerless. And they don't know, this is what the Reuters Institute reported, that they can trust it. And even, the journalists today that I speak to are finding it hard to, stay really deeply connected to the news on a regular basis. So this big question, how do we do our jobs? How do we cover society? How do we, speak truth to power, hold institutions and public officials accountable without making people feel hopeless and powerful? How do we do that? That seems to me the core challenge. And I think it's in this context of this question that these solutions journalism collaboratives are so vital to understand and to talk about, because you are demonstrating new pathways for journalists and news organizations to be radically helpful to their communities, to be able to report on the world as it is without sugarcoating it, but at the same time feeding agency. So there are three key components to what we're talking about today, and I think that at least my understanding of the way the collaboratives work, and I'm sure that there'll be many other ideas that come up as well. The first, I'm a little biased here, is by integrating solutions journalism, rigorous reporting about responses to problems, into the news mix in the very heart of the news mix. Journalists have always known that the public yearns to know what we can do about the problems we report on. And in the past, we've treated solutions journalism as sort of like weekend or holiday fare. There would be a Friday afternoon special or a series at Thanksgiving time as sort of a lead-in to Christmas. But here it's really becoming part of the daily diet, and that's a fundamental difference. And so in doing that, the collaboratives are helping communities to see what their challenges are, and at the same time, what are the emerging ideas, models, and options that are available to help people. This builds awareness and agency at the same time. It's like a good doctor's appointment. A good diagnosis, and we get to talk about treatment options as well. That's important. No one wants a doctor that doesn't talk about treatment options. The other thing is it also reflects the world more accurately. It's basically more of a mirror of the world and less of a kind of cracked mirror of the world. Traditional journalism has always run the danger of presenting the world through a narrative of brokenness. Yes, there is no shortage of problems and corruptions and violence and greed. That's true. But that is only half the story. It might even be less than half the story. There's also ingenuity, compassion, and care, and just ordinary human decency. And these are all around us, but they are left out of our dominant news narratives. And we're living in a country where people don't think that people on the other side of the aisle are very decent. They won't even talk to them. So that part of the story really needs to be told too. And it's really what the collaboratives, these journalism collaboratives are doing. And it matters. It builds hope. It builds respect. It's desperately needed if we are going to heal our fractured society. The second thing that's really key is just in the name, collaboration. As Rich said, collaboration is a hard thing. There are many news collaborations over the years. There's sort of a graveyard of news collaborations over the years. They have not been successful historically. But in the last couple of years, there's really been a lot of success around this. It really takes great effort and leadership and commitment to shift from the old news model that was really grounded in a kind of heated competition, to beat others to the punch, to get the scoop, to move towards a new model which is really grounded in a shared vision and trust. And that trust, as we know, proceeds at the speed of relationships. And that's why this takes real time to build. I think of the collaborative ethos as a kind of potluck dinner of journalism, potluck journalism. Different news organizations are bringing their best dishes, distinct voices, talents, audience understanding, different priorities that speak to their audiences. And when you bring that all together like a potluck dinner, it leads to more possibilities, more creative possibilities. You can bring your coverage together and cross-publishing, which means that everyone has access to a more comprehensive community, a more comprehensive picture of our community, more ideas circulate, and the reporters and their audiences have opportunities to learn from one another, and it builds connections, which are absolutely crucial to mend the society and actually to advance well-being. Connections are key. And finally, the third innovation is just really what we're seeing here, this deep and sustained focus on issues of profound importance to communities. Issues that particularly don't receive the kind of attention that they warrant, caregiving and mental health issues in particular. In the United States today, there's over 53 million people who are providing unpaid care to an adult, like my father did. It's a massive need. A recent survey conducted by the New York and Michigan Solutions Journalism Collaborative which was reported last week in the Detroit News, found that caregivers are disproportionately people of color and often poorer than their county's median income. And almost half of them say that caregiving has taken a really big toll on their emotions. So the sustained broad-based reporting by the collaboratives has a particular power to elevate these issues, to set agendas across broad areas, whole regions or areas of states, and in particular to connect those issues to circulate ideas and resources which are helpful so that people can cross-pollinate good ideas from one another. This is not just a way for journalism to have real-world impact and to help people, but it's also a way to build, or in some cases rebuild, trust with audiences. Because in our heart of hearts, although journalists think you should trust me because I get my facts right, it's really in people's heart of hearts, people tend to trust institutions or others if they believe that those institutions have their backs. You know, someone once said to me, I don't care what you know until I know that you care. And I think that really sums up some of the challenges that journalism is facing today. We need to show people that we care. We're not just reporting on, like we're not just a beeping smoke alarm that people want to take the battery out of because it won't stop. We want to show that we care. And there's no better way to show that we care than to focus on the pain points that people experience, millions of people are experiencing, and digging in and providing really good intelligence and ideas and stories that help them to deal with the problems that they're facing. There's no better way to show people you care. And that's why I think at the deepest level, this journalism is so vital today, because I think it's at the core of what's needed to heal the heart of America, so to speak. I'm going to end just with a reflection about our work at the Solutions Journalism Network. We started this network 9 years ago, and it was really tough going. I mean, for quite a number of years when we would walk into newsrooms and talk about this idea, we were met with very stiff, folded arms. People would literally walk out of meetings in a huff and sometimes say things that were not very friendly. As a Canadian, I would be particularly offended. There was so much resistance to the idea that journalists could also interrogate, investigate, examine, kick the tires on potential or emerging responses to problems. That was seen as outside of the job, and we would hear all the time, that's not our job. That is so different today. I mean, today we have worked with over 600 news organizations around the world in our Solutions Story Tracker, where we hand tag stories. So this is a very human-intensive thing. We've found solutions journalism from 1,700 news organizations, and we know that that is just the tip of the iceberg. Close to 30,000 journalists have worked with us, engaging in workshops or working on projects together or using resources, which we now have in close to 20 languages. Only 2 of those did we have to pay for. The translations were done by other news organizations in other countries, so this is really demand-driven. And now we now see this approach being integrated into the news across the United States, in red states and blue states, in red counties and purple counties, and also in Africa, Europe, and Latin America. It is really still hard to change old habits and behaviors, especially at a time where people are constantly pressured to do more with less. But every day we do see that the shift is happening, and it's encouraging. And the most important thing for everyone in this room to realize is that this work is at the forefront of this movement. These are the examples and the stories and the learning sets that journalists, news organizations, and other collaboratives around the world will be studying. No one has to, recount the challenges we're facing as a country today. It really is a moment of urgency where we need to draw out the best in all of us, the better angels of our nature, and to marshal energy and creativity from all corners to be able to sort of meet this moment and bring people back from what may be despair or disengagement. So I feel really honored to be working alongside colleagues who are doing just that every day, using the power of journalism with deep rigor and care to support people in their communities and to help them find hope, agency, and dignity. Thank you.
I think these are on. Before we get started, I want to remind everyone there are place cards at your table, index cards, I guess, that you can write questions down on, and in a couple minutes after I interrogate David, you guys can do the same. I want to start here. The connection between solutions journalism and collaboration. I think in a lot of instances nowadays, we kind of speak about that as though it's a foregone conclusion, right? The two go together. But I want to back up a little and talk about why it's important that those two things coexist and how they both draw strength from each other.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the problems that previous generations of news collaborations had is that, if you have 15 news organizations who are all agreeing to cover an issue. Let's say the issue is economic justice, like Resolve Philadelphia is doing. You end up having 15 news organizations regularly putting out stories looking at the problem of economic justice. And the fact is, you can't read 100 stories about inequality and poverty and unfairness over and over again. I mean, after you get to 3, you're like, I'm watching Netflix now. Because, but the difference when you have solutions journalism integrated into the mix, you end up getting lots of stories that are kind of like an idea memo, an idea menu, where you can look at, this is what is working for, in the reentry part of our focus. This is what's working for this particular community, for this particular demographics. This is how people are being retrained. And what you can see is you can sort of look at, it's like looking at the different facets of a gemstone. There's many different ways that people are coming at this problem. So it's just much more interesting and nourishing when the solutions element is a big part of it.
Which is harder to sort of get traditional news people to accept, the collaboration part or the solutions part?
Oh gosh, I would have to defer to my colleagues on that one. They're in the trenches with the collaboration. I would say collaboration, yeah. I mean, just in terms of the numbers, we now see solutions journalism being adopted, far and wide by organizations we've had no contact with, just because of sort of organic spread. But I think the idea of collaborating, there's so much in journalism that goes down to my story, my byline, our scoop, and that's that was the old business model too, right? So I think that one is a tougher one.
Yeah. The other thing that's really interesting about this approach, I think, is the idea of sustained attention over a very long period of time, which is also somewhat antithetical to the news cycle, right? So much of what we do is dictated by what happens every day, and the idea that you would define one issue, one narrative as being important all the time is just not the way we think about things. I mean, there's a hurdle there, I guess, when you're talking with journalists.
Yeah, I would totally agree. The idea, it is called the news, right? It's things that are emerging. One of the things that just to try to come at that from an angle, is one of the things that we've seen over the years as we've worked with news organizations who have actually done audience surveys. So when they go to the audience and they say, what would you like from our journalism? Typically, and this is, I mean, most of the time, people say, we want more journalism that helps us understand how to do better or solve our problems, our local problems and challenges. And these are the core issues, and they'll have a list of 5 or 8 issues or something that come up consistently. To which the news organizations often will say, we don't have time to do that. We're doing other things that are more important to us. And it's this really interesting, what do you have to give up, that the audience sometimes experiences as low value coverage in order to do higher value coverage. The fact is, to get a handle on caregiving and mental health issues, which are so complex, you can't do it in 1 story or 5 stories. There's so many dimensions to it, and there are so many different ways people are coming at, different ways people are experiencing the problems, and different ways people are trying to come at them. And so to really come in with a comprehensive view, you do that. The other thing about these stories, especially the solution stories, is that they tend to be more evergreenish. Mm-hmm. You can come back to a story 2 years later and say that is still a model that we could look at. And so the sort of perishability of the story is not nearly as big a factor with solutions journalism.
It also occurs to me that you're talking about building two kinds of relationships differently. One is the relationships among journalists themselves. The other is the relationship between journalists and their readers, their audience, their readers or their viewers. Can you draw a more direct connection between solutions journalism and collaborative journalism and that relationship with the people that we are supposed to be surveying?
Well, I think it's really the connection comes through, in particular, once you are identifying problems and then identifying resources, like the resource guides that are available for caregivers. Then the question is, who do we need to make sure gets these resources? Who are they relevant to? How do we make sure that they actually are meeting people where they are? Where those things have to come out of conversations. And in some ways, the thing that I think is so, you need pressure to drive a certain outcome. And the pressure to drive really good collaborative solutions journalism is we need to be in relationship with our audience. We can't just be imagining what their problems are or imagining the different responses that are meaningful to them. And so I think in a way that that pressure is not as deeply felt by the traditional, I'm going to cover what the mayor said, breaking news, or I'm going to cover an issue that, a flashpoint issue that emerged. But I think the pressure to be in relationship is deeper in this construct.
So let's talk specifically about something like caregiving, one of the subjects that this collaborative is really focused on. Talk about the ways in which, when we think about this problem in an abstract way, right? We know that there are lots of people who need care. There are lots of people who are giving care without support. You start there, but then of course, journalism kind of always has its own life and narrative and takes us to many different things that maybe we didn't think about. Can you talk about some of the surprises, I guess, that have come out of the work, the look at caregiving, the things that you have gotten to that maybe we hadn't anticipated from the jump?
Well, I would say, and once again, I would love to have this question in the conversation by the journalists who've really done the shop floor level reporting, because I've been reading it from a distance. But there are definitely, one of the things that we see is there are definitely patterns in how problems get solved. And one of the biggest pattern that we see with caregiving is how important and helpful it is to support the caregivers. Mm-hmm. You know, and I saw that in my family's life, and we see this over and over. What are skillful supports for caregivers? So some of them is in ways of handling a particular health issue or a particular mental health issue that's more skillful, because people don't necessarily know to do it. And there's models for really helping caregivers just be quasi-professionals in the way that they're doing the care, that they can actually have skills that typically only professionals have. So really creating a kind of amateur, pro-am kind of conversation there. You know, and I think the other one is just making sure that caregivers understand self-care and understand what really works for them to be able to, stay whole for this long-distance journey. Yeah. So those are just a few patterns, but I think what we see, like in our solution story tracker, which has now close to 14,000 stories, is that when you start pulling back and looking at 100, 200, 300, 400 stories, all focused on a similar issue area, you can see that there are these strategic principles that account for success. We call them success factors, and we try to tag them as such. And I think that's one of the valiance of one of the challenges is how do you turn journalism into sort of intelligence, into these frameworks that can be useful by many more people, even way outside the communities that are being reported upon initially.
Yeah, and of course, one of the goals here is outcomes, but those outcomes can be different depending on which community you're working in, which journalists are working on. I mean, one of the really interesting things about this project is that flexibility, that it is really informed by where it's taking place and who's doing it, and it can lead you to something really different in each case.
Yeah, totally. And the fact that you have news organizations that are dealing with completely different segments of the audience, very different demographics, different, the way that they relate to caregiving, the way that they relate to society, the resources that they have, the people who feel more embedded in a family structure, people who feel more prioritizing their independence. These are cultural things. The ability to be able to report on people who come at this emotionally, culturally from very different, and demographically from very different places is absolutely essential to understanding the whole of it.
Yeah. So I spent most of my career, in fact, in opinion writing. We always said that we were solutions makers, right? We wrote columns and editorials that made people do things, told people, here's how you fix this. This is really different from that. And I wanted you to just spend a little time talking about what's different about solutions journalism and advocacy journalism or opinion journalism. I used to say that a policy outcome was always my goal, right? I'm writing a column or an editorial and I want this to happen. It's a little different based on what you're doing.
I would say that the fundamental difference with solutions journalism is that you are reporting on an effort to ameliorate or solve a problem. You're looking at the results it's getting as best as you can ascertain them, ideally from studies or some research that lets you know this is really happening. and then trying to understand what you can learn from that. Now, you're not just saying, okay, I've reported that here, these 3 schools have dramatically increased their graduation rates. This is what America should do. You're looking at, if you look at, 20 different organizations trying to address caregiving or mental health challenges, you may find 5 or 10 different models. So you're putting options on the table for people. You're saying, here's the way they're doing it in this county. Here's the way they're doing it in this institution. Here's the way they may be doing it in Belgium. And you can be able to look at models and ideas that are emerging far and wide. At that point, it's not the journalist's job, it's the editorial writer's job, and it's the policymaker's job to come together and say, okay, we have a lot of different ideas here. We have possibilities. We have things we can explore. We can come together as a community and try to prioritize, try to figure out which ones make the most sense for us, take a few stabs. The process of figuring out what the right solution is a community process. It's a political process. It's a process should be informed by research. The journalist is in the business of reporting on what's happening out there and making sure people see the whole menu of options that they have available. And what also happens with solutions journalism is those options are always changing. Things you report on, a new study comes out and says, well, it really didn't work as effectively as we thought from the first study. Or a study comes out and says, it worked really well, but it's politically impossible. I mean, you will constantly have to revisit these stories and sort of help people understand the context in which you're talking about. But it's not picking winners, it's not pushing for one idea, it's really helping people understand what are their options.
Yeah, yeah. Again, the index cards on your table are for questions. Do we already have some? Okay, well, I will take those.
Maybe that will reduce more.
Yeah. Again, if you have questions, write them down and hand them up. Before we get to these, though, it also occurs to me that the process here now is, and has been since you started this, going to newsrooms and trying to influence their collaboration with other newsrooms or inside the newsroom in a different way. But it seems to me that there's also potential for a new organizing principle here around journalism. In other words, building newsrooms around the idea of collaboration and solutions. And when you started this, that wasn't something that most people were doing, but we are seeing a lot more people think that way now.
Yeah, I think it's, once that wall breaks down and people see themselves as part of an ecosystem, I think you're 100% right. That's when the creativity really starts to bloom.
Yeah. So first question from the audience. How have you been able to measure impact on viewers, news consumers of the solutions journalism approach? Is it too soon to know? Is trust improving?
So there's actually quite a lot of research studies about solutions journalism. We have, in some cases, participated in some studies, but there's a researcher, an academic at I think it's Kaiser Lowe is his name, in Georgia, and he has compiled, I think it's about 100 studies that have now been done that look at the effect of solutions journalism and constructive journalism. And there's all sorts of different ways to look at it. There's audience surveys, there's A/B testing where you try to give people 2 versions of what looks like a very similar story, but one has a higher level of solution reporting into it, so that the difference is that. And then you report on what people say. Do they, it's reports of trust, engagement, sense of efficacy and agency. Those are the most important things that we've found. Probably the most consistent finding we found is that there's an increase in agency when people are connected to solutions, when people have the option to look at solutions level reporting. But the other ways that we look at this is through news organizations themselves. Every news organization has different ways of trying to understand how their stories are being engaged with and whether or not this is advancing trust in the community. Some of our partners have actually linked revenue generation specifically to solutions journalism, where they've been able to raise revenues from local sources, whether it's sponsorship or some cases from community foundations or just asking the public around that. So that's another impact. But it really, the research, the University of Texas at Austin, the Engaging News Project did some research that also looked, this was early on in solutions journalism, at some of these questions as well. Consistently, the findings are that people have a preference for journalism that helps them understand what they can do about a problem, which is sort of kind of obvious. People want to have a sense of control about something that they're worried about. But the trust thing is the thing that I think more research is required on, because that's a deeper question. And people, as we see in the United States today, the best proxy for trust is, what do I know about what this person believes in terms of larger policy or partisan issues? And that's a very big one that journalists are facing. It won't be solved just by solutions journalism.
Yeah. I think the trust question also comes down to how much readers or viewers feel like they're a part of the same community as the news organization that they're relying on, or if they feel like that news organization is kind of outside that community and covering it. When they feel like they're part of it, then I think that starts to build some of the trust that you're talking about.
Yeah, definitely. Just to that point, our first project was with the Seattle Times Education Lab, which was initially supposed to be a one-year project. It's now going into its 9th year. And it was, the constituencies originally for that were people in public education. Did they read Education Lab? And that was something that the Times was really interested in. And, over the years, they found a lot more engagement. They found higher click rates on the education stories that had solutions in them. They actually had 3 times the response rates on some of the social media for the solutions journalism stories. But in the end, it was when they would have teachers and people in the public schools come and essentially say, this journalism is really helping us. And I was once at a conference in the Seattle Times newsroom where they brought in a student of Rainier Beach High School, who, he was the most powerful speaker by basically telling all the journalists in the room, you only ever used to report on our school, and telling us how badly we were screwing up and how low our test scores was, and now you come in and you actually track the improvements we're making, and we really appreciate that. And that was something that a lot of journalists said was the most emotional moment for them of the conference.
Okay, next question. How can small independent newsrooms with 1 or 2 journalists on staff transition to solutions journalism with such limited capacity? Capacity is always something that we're trying to juggle and balance in newsrooms.
Yeah, so this is the sort of the core question we get all the time. So some of it is, you have to look at, is there anything you can let go of? Are there things, and this is why the collaborators are so helpful, what are the things that you can safely say, someone's going to handle this? Someone's going to attend this press conference, and it will be recorded. And if they let us deal with that, we can focus on something that our audience has said is really important that no one else is doing. So it goes back to, what are our priorities for coverage, really speaking to your audience? What do you really need to know? What's missing from the awareness in our community that is preventing us from being the community that we aspire to be? And if you speak to that, you will be meeting people where they are.
Mm-hmm.
And the question is really looking hard at these old turn the crank kind of behavior patterns about whether you really need to be doing all of those things that you're doing. What can you let go of safely? Because either it's not as valuable as what you would be doing instead, or someone else is handling it and you trust them.
Yeah. Well, and that gets to this organizing principle that I was talking about before, that maybe the goal is to reorganize newsrooms or the idea of newsrooms around these kind of principles, rather than we've got to be at every meeting or we've got to be at every press conference.
Yes, that's right. And that porousness that you're talking about is, I think there's a lot of opportunity there if people think that way. It's a mental shift that has to happen.
Yeah. Next question is, we are in an attention economy. How does solutions journalism get the attention of distracted, disengaged news audiences and news outlets?
Yeah, so it is true that people are more likely to click on things that make them angry and sort of fill them with outrage than the headline that seems to be a sort of a good news headline. So we're really pretty, clear on the idea that solutions journalism should never be thought of as, quote, good news. What people really love and prioritize is information that helps them to feel more powerful and more in control. Power is really a very attractive thing to people. And also people love solving problems. We all love puzzles, whether it's Wordle or Sudoku or something, or watching, Law and Order or something like that. We love these kind of how-done-it narratives. So you can really tell solutions journalism stories by driving the narrative through curiosity. Like, how did this community actually do better with low resources against this hard challenge? How did this family or this agency manage to provide real help to people when other things weren't effective? So if you begin with the question and you kind of get people with curiosity, you can begin to sort of battle against the outrage draw, because there's an evolutionary gravity to those clicks. So it's moving it away from the good news frame, from the this will make you feel better frame, to this is information that will improve your life frame, and this is stuff that you're really going to think that, like, how did they do that? You're going to be engaged through that how-done-it kind. We call them how-done-its, like that sort of how-done-it narrative. And by the way, the detective story is the most popular narrative form in the world, everywhere. Every country has detective stories. And so, it's a narrative form, drive the narrative by curiosity, that I think journalism could use a lot more effectively to get attention.
Yeah. By the way, I X'd out on Wordle today. I don't know if anyone else did. It's a really awful word. Hey, don't say that.
Don't give it away. Don't give it away. That's my...
Has solutions journalism changed circulation declines? It's an interesting question.
It's really, really, really hard to connect increases in subscriptions and readership to solutions journalism. And it's not really clear yet that this has sort of made huge changes in people's numbers. The main thing is that there are very few news organizations still that do solutions journalism on a deeply consistent basis. It's still kind of like meditating twice a week kind of thing. Like, it's good for you, but you're really not going to get the benefits. And so I think that the real challenge for really demonstrating the economic potential of solutions journalism is, and we're seeing this more and more, news organizations really have to signpost it. You have to say, look, we're changing, like Southwest Airlines, we're going to talk to you differently. We're changing the product. You've asked for this. We're going to be doing this. We need your support. We need your financial support as well as your engagement. And this is why we're doing it. And really to speak directly to audiences, to bring them back. Because most people, when you speak to them, they don't even realize that they've read something different until it's told to them. And if it's not done on a consistent basis, if it's not signposted properly, it sort of, they absorb it, but they don't really realize that this is something's changing. That's an invitation for them to re-engage with that news organization.
Yeah. I also wonder whether circulation or clicks or whatever measure you're using, if you're a news organization, is the right measure for something like this. So if you have 100,000 people clicking on a detective story, for instance, and clicking through it and just going on to something else, is that necessarily more valuable than maybe 20,000 people who are coming back over and over again, really engaging with that news organization and with each other about a subject? I mean, there's a philosophical question there, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you're 100% right. I mean, really understanding how journalism helps, how it works, how it engages people and creates a focal point for a conversation, especially if it creates a focal point for a conversation that moves away from, how did we get here and who's to blame, to, okay, these are our options. How are we going to discuss what they are and how are we going to make sense of them and what are our next steps? So that's, I think, the biggest value, is moving people away from, now, just going back to the clicks, we have seen, like in the ADB, for example, in the A/B testing and in the stuff that the Seattle Times did many years ago, they found that the solution stories in Education Lab did get more clicks and did draw more people to them. But when I spoke to, you speak to the editors and you say, is this helping the bottom line? They were like, solutions journalism does not compare with the Seattle Seahawks. I'm sorry. We're in a completely different ballgame when it comes to what really drives, revenues in this newsroom. Now, having said that, the Seattle Times now has a few dozen, I think it's close to 30 positions in the newsroom that are funded by new projects that grew out of Education Lab. Solutions-oriented series focused on traffic and transportation, on homelessness and other things. So there are opportunities that are suggested from what they've been done with the model.
We have time for one more question, is that right? All right. How might a collaborative extend the shelf life of its journalist findings? Asking because online relegates... Sorry, I'm not able to read the handwriting here. That's okay, mine is awful as well. Asking because online text, something to relegate content quickly to obscurity, tends to relegate content quickly to obscurity. Did you get that?
So the question is...
How might a collaborative extend the shelf life of its
extending
journalist
the shelf life? Well, this gets back to the kind of evergreen nature of the stories. The problems are not going away, but consistently you are finding other places or other parts of your own community that still haven't gotten, a good idea. There actually was research from the Institute of Medicine many years ago that said, even in medicine, it takes 17 years for research from randomized controlled trials to reach 50% of practice. That's how long change takes when you have better ideas and better methods. It's not like people just do them tomorrow. So you have these nuggets of knowledge with teachable lessons, not only at the story level, but at the aggregate level of the patterns across stories. Putting that knowledge out into the world and trying to find places where it's useful, whether it's county health commissioners or other communities where this problem was just reported. Finding clients who really need this knowledge and trying to sort of broker those linkages, I think, is one way to, and you can do it through newsletters. There's lots of other through social media feeds where you meet people who are consistently going to be looking for knowledge around these problems. And there's such a huge variation in performance and awareness around the very same problems. And there's more than 3,000 counties in the US, so there are always people who need what you know. And that's, I think, ultimately one of the opportunities.
Okay, well, congratulations on all the work with Solutions Journalism. Welcome to Detroit again, and thanks for being here.
Thank you very much. Thank you.